And we're live.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is the 8th meeting of the Commission to Restore Trust in Policing that we've held virtually. We've been meeting now for just about 2 years on this very important assignment. And we're delighted to have most of our commissioners are here today. In fact, we've had just excellent attendance through the years. Maybe one or two who may join us in a minute, or maybe one unable because of the short notice of this meeting. But we'll go ahead and get started by doing exactly what we always do, and that's introducing the commissioners who are with us. I am Alex Williams. I am the chair of the Commission to Restore Trust in Policing. Ask the other commissioners to introduce themselves.
I'm Jim Roby, retired state senator and retired police chief from Howard County.
Good morning. I'm Ashia Parker. I'm the executive director of No Boundaries Coalition and a resident of West Baltimore.
Good morning, Gary McElhenney, the Assistant Secretary of Public Safety and Correctional Services and retired police chief.
Sean Malone, attorney in Baltimore.
All right. Is that everyone? Do we have Commissioner Robb or Wilson yet? Okay, they may join us as soon as they can, but we do have a quorum. Now, the first business for today would be to hear from former, hello? The first business for the day is to hear from former Commissioner Anthony Batts.
Yeah, this is Commissioner.
All right, this is Commissioner Robb. Okay, she is here, the commissioner is here, so that's 6 of 7 commissioners that checked in with us so far, and I know Commissioner Wilson mentioned that she had a conflict for this meeting. She may try to join us, but we're just about full. All right, former Commissioner Anthony Batts is with us today, and we're going to ask that we thank him, first of all, for being available and agreeing to give us his reflections and answer a couple of important questions that we have as we work through our report. And so I'm going to ask that our court reporter identify herself and then administer the oath to the witness, Anthony Batts.
My name is Susan Camboris. Mr. Batts, could you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Feel free to leave. You don't have to stay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All
right. Peter, Megan, can you all start the questioning of Commissioner Batts, who's now under oath?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Batts. Thank you very much for coming.
Good morning, Mr. Chief.
Could you state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Anthony Batts, B-A-T-T-S. Could I give my address offline?
Okay, that's fine. And former Commissioner Batts, we did issue a subpoena for your appearance. You agreed to cooperate, and we very much appreciate your voluntary cooperation with this commission.
I never did get the subpoena.
Yeah, we emailed one to you, and then you had gotten a letter from us as well and agreed to appear this morning. Let's start out by having you give us an overview of your career in law enforcement. Before you became commissioner in Baltimore, I understand that you were commissioner both in Long Beach, California, and in Oakland, California. Can you walk us through for a couple minutes your background in law enforcement before you came to Baltimore?
I think you basically kind of summed it up. I started police work. Well, actually, I started police work in college. I went from a police cadet to a police officer in roughly 1982. I was a reserve officer prior to that also. I've been around police work for a very long time. Was with the Long Beach Police Department roughly a little over 27 years. 7 of those 27 years, I was chief of police. Was recruited to the city of Oakland. I was at Oakland Police Department for 2 years. Went to do some work with for a short amount of time with Harvard University, and then went on to Baltimore Police Department.
And you were our commissioner here in Baltimore from 2012 to 2015, is that correct?
Roughly September of 2012 to roughly about July 8th of 1,500 hours of 2015.
And after you left your service in Baltimore, what have you been doing professionally since 2015?
Consultant working with different municipalities.
And is that also in law enforcement as well?
Yes, working with mostly command officers, chiefs of police, executives.
And can you give us a sense of what your work as a consultant involves?
Basically dealing with the president's 21st century plan and conversations on basic leadership.
Mm-hmm. And were you involved in President Obama's task force on 21st century policing?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that, I guess I would call my most embarrassing professional moment. I got a call on a Friday afternoon, I believe, or evening from a number I did not recognize in the evening, inviting me to the White House on Monday morning from someone I didn't know, thought it was a prank call. Showed up at the White House thinking I was going to be embarrassed because somebody made a prank call. In fact, I was on the list and went into a room with a bunch of notables, being Charles Ramsey, Lori, forget Lori's name, who was on the panel, the mayor of New York, and about 20 different notables where the president of the United States came in. And I sat next to Vice President Joe Biden and announced the fact that he was doing the 21st century plan, which I thought I was a part of the plan, but that was just for the president to sign the document starting the plan off.
Mm-hmm. And did you appear before that task force or provide any advice to the task force?
I did at some point in time. I think it may have been in Phoenix that I went out and I participated. Yes. So the answer to the question is yes.
Mm-hmm. After you left Baltimore, former Commissioner Batts, did you follow the news accounts about the gun trace task force?
No, I did not.
Are you aware that there were more than a dozen officers in Baltimore who were prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office here and either convicted or pleaded guilty of stealing money from drug dealers, unlawful stops and seizures, making false statements, planting evidence, committing overtime fraud? Were you aware of that, sir?
I was not aware with your conversation in mind, I should say, as I've kind of disconnected from the city of Baltimore. But based on being here today, I did go back and look at some news reports, yes.
Mm-hmm. And what was your reaction when you learned of that?
I think anytime I support, and I've spent my entire life in law enforcement, and I support police officers in the job that they do, and they have a very difficult job that they do out there, and I take a great deal of pride in being a law enforcement officer for many years, but I have no tolerance for corruption. I have no tolerance for corrupt police officers, zero. And if in fact they have done what they said, I'm pretty happy and glad that they were held to justice and brought to justice.
Were you aware when you were commissioner in the city of Baltimore of any criminal misconduct by any of the officers who were serving with the force under your command?
Could you repeat that again?
Yes. Were you aware of any criminal misconduct by any of the officers in the Baltimore Police Department when you were serving as the commissioner?
Are you asking if I was aware of members on that task force who were involved in criminal activity?
Yes, let's start there.
Police officers as a whole?
Yeah, let's start there with regard to any members of the gun trace task force. And I can give you names of those officers. You may or may not remember any of them, but were you aware of any criminal misconduct ongoing under your command by those officers?
The short answer is no. The long answer is when I went back to review and prepare for this presentation, I didn't recognize any of the players' names or don't remember coming in contact with anyone, including the supervisors, a supervisor.
So you don't remember ever being involved with Wayne Jenkins or any of the other members of the Gun Trace Task Force?
No, I have no recollection of coming in contact with specific people, no.
One of the deputies under your command was Jerry Rodriguez, is that correct?
Correct.
And what was Mr. Rodriguez's function?
I brought Jerry in from the West Coast. I needed someone who was very focused on excessive force, integrity issues, basically professional standards. I brought him in to build a professional standards unit, which he did. I would say I needed a pit bull who would kind of rip into stuff and start tearing things apart and start holding the organization accountable under my direction.
When you first became the commissioner, what was, if you can recall, what was your assessment of the quality of internal affairs and the quality of accountability measures within the department when you began your tenure?
I was not happy with internal affairs or the process of internal affairs. I had to go through my own process of learning. It was different from where I came from. Where I came from, so let's say the city of Long Beach, I was the ultimate say on discipline. It all came to me. I made the recommendations. What I said went. They had the ability to appeal to civil service after that. With Baltimore, they have a panel. The panel seemed to be a little light, like they didn't want to hold people accountable. Internal affairs itself, I thought was not up to the standard that I would have liked or would have liked it to be, which is the reason why I brought in Jerry Rodriguez.
And can you describe for us during the 3 years that you were commissioner, some of the reforms and changes that you and Mr. Rodriguez instituted in the Baltimore Police Department?
Well, it wasn't just Jerry Rodriguez. Brought in a couple more so civilian attorneys that came in to the organization. Tried to keep the command staff the way that it was to remove some problematic people. There's people that I pushed out of the organization at command staff. There's people that I put pressure on to move out of their way. I thought they were either part of the problem in the organization, but I guess from a systems analysis standpoint, and I don't want to be seen as being ugly or bad-mouthing police organization as a whole, but I thought the vast majority of the systems within the Baltimore Police Department were broken. It was one of the most battered police organizations I think I've seen in my career. And it would take building it basically from ground up. I think there was a lot of good things done by the previous commissioners that were there. I think the officers are some of the most courageous police officers I've seen in my career, but a lot of the systems were broken within the police organization.
Can you give us any examples that come to your mind? And I know it's been a few years, but of particular systems within internal affairs or involving accountability that you thought were badly deteriorated or had become broken?
Well, internal affairs, I think Jerry Rodriguez is probably going to be the better person to answer that because that was his bailiwick. What I dealt with, and he dealt with the operations of running internal affairs as a whole. I do know that he and I talked a lot about different things in there. I can't remember off the top in specificity what we talked about. We needed to remove people and replace them to get them on board. We needed to do training of command officers to get them on board to know the level of expectations I had of them. But I like what I can give you, which is from my policy standpoint, because I dealt with policy. Jerry had the responsibility of running operations with internal affairs. I do remember when I first came in, meeting with the FBI, ended up having, I think, a multiple hour, 2 or 3 hour presentation from the FBI. There was integrity things that the FBI had a task force that were consistent of Baltimore police officers and FBI agents that were looking at potential rogue activity taking place within the police organization as a whole. I would get periodic updates, and from there, Jerry Rodriguez was my liaison for those updates and would update me. But what I saw overall in the organization, if I may, if it's okay, Mr. Keith, from some of the systems.
Yes.
It's a little broader than what you're talking about, but the things that I saw when I walked that concerned me is the overall culture within the organization. What I picked up from the culture, and excuse my language, I think it was a culture of people trying to be badasses instead of police department focused on community policing. I saw that use of force was what I thought too high for an organization of that size. I saw that officer involved shootings. I believe the level was too high. The policies were outdated. When I went back and looked at my strategic plan, what came out of that was there was a need to update 46 new general orders, 12 police commissioner memos, 21 different forms of policies, 3 standard operating procedures, somewhere close to 82 policies that were out of line and out of alignment, which also had sub issues going with there. 7 out of the 9 substations had significant security issues dealing with them, that people could walk in at any times. Cars were not secured. Evidence security was an issue, which I put under Jerry Rodriguez, which is non-traditional, but I wanted him to take the evidence room. There was concerns there with money and or drugs. Uniforms on officers were not up to standard. Ketchup stains, mustard stains, cars had dents. There was no computers in cars. There was no, which caused radio traffic issues on the radio. The department was the lowest paid police department it was told that it was the lowest paid police department in the state. They had no tasers, which kind of led, or they had 100 tasers, which kind of led to a use of force and officer involved shootings that were impacting. The tactics that I saw when I was out on the street were not to the standard that I was used to. I saw that the overtime was being spent, which looked to me, if I remember correctly, that there was an agreed upon MOU, memorandum of understanding, between the union and the city that was almost daily providing overtime, which was a concern for me. Sick time was extremely high, and injury on duty time was extremely high. EOC complaints were through the roof of sexual harassment by employees and bosses. And that's just a thumbnail sketch. There was a lot of things that were broken in the organization from that point, but that gives you a roundabout general macro view of many of the systems I had to work with. And believing I only had 2 years to be there, since Baltimore tends to be a hyper political city, I thought I had 2 years to get done what I was going to get done, then I was going to get pushed out.
Now, former Commissioner Batts, let me ask you a specific question. In your interactions with Deputy Commissioner Rodriguez, did Rodriguez ever speak to you about 2 officers who were ultimately became part of the Gun Trace Task Force, Jamel Ram and Mamadou Gondo? Do those names ring a bell to you?
Don't ring a bell for me, no.
Okay, thank you. This commission has been grappling with what I think are 3 main issues. The first is, how did this criminal misconduct happen and continue to happen over a period of many years and not be detected by the Baltimore Police Department? The second issue is, how can we help ensure that this doesn't happen again? And the third issue is, how do we restore trust in the community? And I'd like to walk through those questions with you. And I appreciate your summary of the problems and the culture within the organization when you arrived. As you reflect on this situation, do you have any observations on how there could be misconduct of this type involving so many officers involved in street narcotics enforcement, who sometimes acted individually, but also sometimes acted in pairs or groups in committing misconduct, and having that not be detected internally by the department, either through internal affairs or through reports by other officers? Do you have any insight or reflections on that issue?
Well, I don't know if I have insights, but my thought process is there. I tend to look at things from a systems analysis approach. And I think a large number of the systems within Baltimore, as I was sharing with you, were broke. And this is not the first time Baltimore has dealt with corruption issues. When I went back and I was preparing to go into the police organization, and I reviewed the 1990s and part of the 1980s, you can see that the history is there. It's part of the culture. You had police officers who were bank robbers. You had police officers stealing money and drugs from other people. This is not the first time that this has happened. You had Daniel Redd a couple of years prior to me getting there, who was a police officer that I read had done a dope deal on the back steps of a police station in uniform. You had the tow scandal where you had 60, not 60 officers indicted for a tow scandal. And so what you can see there is that this is not something that's just unusual. It has been historic in the organization. It's what I thought I saw when I was walking into the organization as a whole. I think it's part of the culture, but it's just not with the police department. I think the city itself, the governance of the city has history, but also dealing with corrupt issues along those lines. What I saw is there were council people that had their fingers into that police organization. Let me back up even before that. I think the city, from my perspective, it's just my opinion, does not have a respect for the position of commissioner or chief of police. I think they believe that position is a throwaway position, and where you have a chief come in for 6 months and they get fired, or 2 months and they get fired, or 2 years they get fired. And so what your staff understands is, I could wait you out. You're only going to be here for a half a minute. I don't have to do what you're gonna say. Once you get something online, you're going to be gone. Next guy's going to come in. We're going to start over. They're going to be gone. And so the perspective I have is that the city itself does not have a respect for the position, which leaves it a little powerless to get things done. You have city council people who had their fingers deep into that organization. There was times that I would get subtle calls of people asking me, this recruit or this person applied for this job. They didn't get it. I've known the family forever. He's a good kid. And subtly what they were saying to me, or how I took it, is you should look at hiring this person, go back and take another look and look at hiring this person. Well, I didn't fold to that, and I don't fold to activities along those lines. I would get people asking me, hey, or making statements, so-and-so is a good promotee, he'd make a good sergeant, or he'll make a good lieutenant. And they were never outright. They're just subtle things that people would kind of bring up. I think politicians need to keep their fingers out of that police organization. There again, I kind of focused on working for the public trust over than just dealing with the concept of just working for politicians. I think when I talk about the system's been broken, I talked about policies, why that's so crucial. When policies are out of date, those are the things that instruct and give the organization its direction. It also should have audit responsibilities. Who has responsibility to check and go back and make sure things are running correctly? Police departments have the same issues over and over again, no matter what department it is. You're going to have issues dealing with evidence. You're going to have issues dealing with money. You're going to have issues dealing with drugs. You're going to have issues dealing with prostitutes and cash. And those are things that are replicated in most police departments that you have to audit on a regular basis and to check to make sure. Supervisors need to be the first line of defense to that. Your sergeants, your lieutenants, your captains, and on up to your majors, your lieutenant colonels, your colonels. Every one of them have to have audit responsibilities, telling them when they check things, what they check things, what is expected on them as a whole. And that's part of the system as a whole coming together. And as I said, all those systems were broken, but part of this should have popped up in other ways. So part of this should have popped up. I met with, and I may be wrong in this, so don't quote me on this exactly. I met with either bi-weekly or monthly with the heads, the SACs of the FBI, the DEA, ATF, the marshals, state police. And so with all those connectivities, especially like with the FBI, who works with CIs in Baltimore, DEA, who works with CIs in Baltimore, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, working with CIs in Baltimore. Theoretically, that should have popped up in those things. We had an integrity unit specifically in the FBI to look for these things. It didn't pop up there either. And so probably why it wasn't popping up, and you see this in other agencies also that have this type of issue, is the fact that when you have criminals and you're putting pressure on criminals, the criminals don't want to go to jail, so they don't talk or they don't tell. But theoretically, there was somebody new out there at some point in time. The other place that it should have popped up is in the public defender's office. And so usually those are people, public defenders hear about those things and they come up and they kind of share. So whether within the police department, where we did actually have a unit looking for these things, I didn't have a chance to install a integrity unit specifically in internal affairs. I think that's one thing that I would have changed. But this should have been popping up in a lot of different mechanisms that are out there outside of the police department. The fact that it didn't was because most likely you were dealing with criminals who probably didn't know who they could trust in police work and who was on the take and who was on the take, but it should have been popping up in different places.
Mhm. As part of your consulting work with law enforcement organizations, do you give them advice on accountability systems and how to deter and and detect misconduct by law enforcement officers within their organizations?
Not to the detail that you're probably asking, more so to the detail I just shared with you.
Mhm. Do you have some views on what accountability measures you think are best to basically keep officers in line, to keep to both deter and to detect officer misconduct?
I think all the systems that come in a consent decree, and most like that's the part that I kind of focused on in my strategic plan that I put together to run that organization. And when I talk about strategic plan, it wasn't something that we did and put up on the shelf. That's how I ran that organization day in, day out. The strategic plan is how I ran my staff meetings every week when I met with my command staff. That's the one thing we were focused on. That strategic plan was taken from the consent decrees throughout the United States. So we, at the time, we looked at Seattle, we looked at Oakland, we looked at New Orleans. We looked at the major consent decrees that were out there at that time and made them part of the police department. And we started to kind of put those things in place over my 2-year place that's there. I also asked for and made a recommendation to bring in collaborative reform into the Baltimore Police Department. When I was a second vice president under Chuck Ramsey and Chuck being one of the members that are running your consent decree now, we saw this thing start off collaborative reform, which is just like having a consent decree, but the city does it itself by doing everything that a DOJ would bring to the table and all the pieces that were brought to the table. The city started down that path, took another direction and wanted to go with a formal consent decree. Both of them, I think, would have came out with the same results. And so in answer to your question, I think all the things that come under consent decree are the things that are going to change that organization. I do think that you're going to have to dig very deep into the culture of that organization as a whole. It's going to take a while. One thing that you can't control, and usually I figure out cultures by listening to stories. Police department, police officers as a whole, we communicate based on stories. We tell war stories, mythologies, all those things. That's how, and if you listen to those war stories, they'll tell you what the culture of the organization is, what they think are the great officers, the wonderful officers, and why they are as a whole. What you can't get around, and it worked for me in Long Beach, but did not work for me in Baltimore, is in Long Beach, I brought the union to the table and allowed them in all of my meetings with the exception of an executive meeting or internal affairs meeting. I didn't want them to be blindsided. I want them to know, I wanted them to participate, and I also wanted them to understand how I was trying to change the culture and not hurt the organization. In Baltimore, I offered them the same thing for them to come to the table. They did for a while, then they pulled back. My point is, and I don't know the answer to this, is how do you change culture by working with the unions? And the unions have more informal power than any chief of police or a commissioner may have. And if you don't get that union on board, and if they're not a part of solving a solution, you're going to continue to have the same problems with the culture long term.
Do you have a view about the value of accountability measures like polygraphs for narcotics enforcement officers or integrity stings?
I think that's good. I believe when I was there, you have drug testing that goes on. I know because I think I was tested 3 times. So you have drug testing that goes on in the organization, polygraph, integrity stings. I think all those things, as much as you possibly can do, I think is extremely important, and be transparent about those things also. I think it's one to do those tests, is another thing to let the community know what you're doing and to make sure that you are upholding the public trust. And maybe another part of that, all those things, is having an organization or an internal agency responsible for that and make part of the community part of it. Be open and honest about it. Let them know, rebuild the trust within the community as a whole. I think there's a lot of good officers in the Baltimore Police Department. Like I said, I think there's some broken systems. They're some of the most courageous officers I've ever seen, but they also need training and they need to be directed in the right direction.
When you think about the culture that you encountered in Baltimore. Was it your sense that officers were afraid of speaking up if they observed misconduct, afraid of reporting for fear of retaliation, or that it might adversely affect their careers?
It's hard to say. What I picked up is there's a lack of self-pride in the organization, right? So I started off by telling you some of the things I saw with uniforms that weren't kept, mustard stain, ketchup stains, dirty uniforms, police cars that were defective, doors caved in, lights not working. Those are all pride-related issues, right? And they're also leadership issues. And so I think that when I would ask people and we'd have an egregious incident that took place, I'd ask the officers, what do you think about that? And what I get back was a quote unquote, that's some more of that Baltimore shit, right? And so for them, it was just this mediocrity of, it's just Baltimore. That's just how it goes. That's where we come from. And it's just like that. And so what I wanted to really do is kind of raise the level of pride within that organization. I tried to bring in outside leaders from Navy SEALs, different speakers that came in to talk about how they had pride in organization. I think when you have pride in yourself and your organization, you don't tolerate those things. When it's your norm, when you're so used to it, then you accept it. And I think that's what I got out of it, is that it was just acceptable. Now I had heard rumors, nothing that was confirmed. I heard rumors that you had Ku Klux Klan's members within the police department, not confirmed. I heard that you had 1%ers that were in the police department, not confirmed. I've heard that many of the police officers thought that a lot of officers had sticky hands, which meant that they were taking money or taking different things. These were all a sense of norm within the organization. And that's why I talk about the culture, and that other agencies, this would piss police officers off. If you had one person do this, this would piss them off because you sullied that badge. You sullied the patch that we stand for, that we risk our lives for every day. But it wasn't that way. It was just like, all right, just our day-to-day routine.
We've heard testimony from other witnesses that there was a time in Baltimore where officers were being judged basically on performance metrics, like the number of arrests, number of guns seized, number of stops, as opposed to basically their increasing trust within the community and engaging in crime prevention and community policing. Did you encounter that in Baltimore in terms of the culture, namely the officers' respect being based upon how aggressive they were, the metrics, as opposed to how well they interacted with the community?
Oh, clearly, when I shared with you at the beginning, I kind of, excuse my language, I said it was a culture of being a badass. That is another way of saying the same thing. It was a culture of being the toughest, not cowering, running into the middle. I remember reading something, I think somebody sent me, I think it was from the New York Times, I can't remember, but it was a retired command member who said that our officers have to understand, or the people on the street have to understand, we're willing to die for what we believe, just like they're willing to die, and we won't back down. Something around, I'm paraphrasing it. But that's part of the culture that I picked up in the organization. Part of when I was brought in, one of the things that the mayor said that she wanted was a more robust community policing program. When I sat down with the command staff, and when I walked in, I had an interview with the vast majority of command staff, and I basically said they have to reapply for their jobs and prove to me that they still want to do their jobs. What I wanted to get out of that was what was really going on in the organization. And what came out of those meetings is that there was a significant issue with VCIT, Violent Crime Impact Team. What it looked like to me is that this was a seamless system that ran through the organization. The concept actually looked good on paper as it was put together. But what I heard from the community, when I talked to the community, what I heard from the council people, what I heard from the internal police department, is that Violent Crime Impact Team, which was most responsible for the drop in homicides, was also the one causing the officer-involved shootings, the excessive force, the lawsuits, and all the problematic issues that you were having within that organization as a whole. And that the leadership of that organization was directly tied to the higher echelons of the organization, and they were getting their direction along those lines. And the more guns that you took off the street, the more kudos that you got. When I did CompStat, or asked how CompStat was run, What I was told is that CompStat was kind of run like it was back in the mid 1990s from New York. That if you did not make your level of things that you should have been done, or you didn't have answers to the question, you could walk in as a captain and walk out as a lieutenant. I tried to change all those things. I tried to get them to not be so police centric at solving crime problems. To kind of look at it as a more holistic issue. Look at crime. Only thing Baltimore is, when I walked in, was focused on is homicides. It's the only thing they care about. If homicides are going up, you're failing at what you're doing. If homicides are going down, you're successful. I think that causes more tangential problems when you just focus there. If you can't get it down, you start pushing harder on the same people that you deal with on a daily basis. You start trying to get more results out of those things. I try to get them to look at crime as a system, and that we have to take back those public spaces. People have to feel comfortable. You can't have people under the influence on drugs on every corner, or broken windows, I guess, along those lines, but not using broken windows like New York used it, but being aware of it, and that we have to address those, because not every neighborhood is impacted by shootings. They're impacted by different things, and they have a right to good policing too. And what you'll see as the results after my second year in 2014 was that not only did the previous year went up in 2013, but the homicide rate went down. We would have, if we didn't have one bad January, I would have taken Fred Billfield's record for the lowest homicides, but we had one bad January. I love Fred. But what you'll see is all crimes in part one were down. Every single crime category was down, to get them off of just focusing on homicides. And I think if you do the spectrum, it has an impact overall as a whole. We also did community policing. I put a person in charge of community policing. I didn't get the results of what I wanted out of community policing. I wanted to have an entire organization trained. I didn't want a couple of units doing community policing. I wanted, as a philosophy, and all police officers to do it, try to get them out of their cars, get them on walking beats. I would get out there with officers with walking beats. I invited the community into the police department, started a number of advisory groups. One of your commissioners were one of my advisory groups, but we had gay and lesbian advisory groups. We had African-American advisory groups, Hispanic advisory groups, and trying to bring them in. I let the community come in and be on selection boards. So as we were doing promotions, I had community members sitting in on the selection boards, so they could see that we're open and honest. So what I tried to do to counter all those numbers and things along those lines is kind of bring in community policing, to get away from the numbers counting, to be more accountable to the community as a whole. And I think we saw those results with, we had lower officer-involved shootings. We had a lower lawsuits, and every major metric you have for a major police department, we had reductions in every category at the end of 2014.
Can you share with us a little bit about your departure from Baltimore? Obviously, you were commissioner during the unrest associated with Freddie Gray and the prosecution of those officers. Basically, and then I gather at that point, the mayor advised you that she was no longer interested in having you be commissioner.
Well, she didn't put it that way. It was kind of Mr. Keith. That's kind of mean.
Is that too kind, or?
That wasn't kind at all. I would say that my interaction with the mayor, she was always respectful of me my entire time that I was there. After, I don't want to go into a lot of hearsay, but I would just kind of say there is no reason why that American city was on fire. There was no reason why the damage should have been there like it was, and I'll just leave it at that because I'm not going into anything further along those lines because it'd get into hearsay. But after the riots of probably about a week or two, I went to the mayor and said, and I always told her, I said, if you want to go a different direction, just tap me on the shoulder and I'll step down. It comes with the job. It's a business. I did it for a long time. Don't take it personally. And she and I had a conversation, and she said that she basically left me with that she had faith in me still, and that we both knew what really took place under the circumstances. And she said the best thing we could do is be successful. And so we went about our business, and the officers started to shut down. They were angry at me. They were angry at the state's attorney. They were angry at the media as a whole. They wanted me to stand up for them and say that those officers didn't do anything wrong in the Freddie Gray issue. What I would tell command officers is that my job is to be an umpire to call balls and strikes. When the officers do well, you say they do well and you pat them on the back and you give them all the credit. But when they do wrong, they also you do wrong. When we had due responsibility for Freddie Gray's care. Once we put handcuffs on him and detained him, we were responsible for his care. There's no time that I thought or believed from the information that I got that the officers had harmed Freddie Gray. I think, unfortunately, there is no reason why that young man should not have gone home alive on that day. But we did not have due care the way that I believe that we should have of his safety in custody. And as officers started to shut down and not follow through with what their oath was, I went back to the mayor after holding a PERF conference. Part of what I did was I wanted to be open about our shortfalls. I knew what was broken in the police department. I knew what was fixable. And I brought PERF in to be open and honest because my thing is always be transparent. Let people know, show them, and just call balls and strikes. So at the halfway point of the PERF conference, I was called to the mayor's office. And I kind of knew that if I was going to be let go, it was going to be let go before August, just based on politics, that I would get called in prior to that. So I got called in on July 8th. When I met with the mayor, she asked me, when I met with her, I had told her prior, if you have to let me go, I want you to do it because I came to work for you. Don't send a deputy mayor or anybody else. I want you to look me in the eye and let me know. And she sat down with me in a very respectful way. And she says, Tony, we've decided to go in a different direction. And she gave me a couple options. And one of the options was to resign and she'll say good things about me or initiate the termination clause in my contract. And she'll still say good things about me.
Well, former Commissioner Batts, I very much appreciate your testimony. I've taken up a lot of time with questions, and I'm sure our commissioners have questions of you as well. So that's
More questions.
That'll be all for me. But thank you very much for your time and for your service to Baltimore as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you much.
I'll just, for clarity, Commissioner, was that Mayor Rollins?
It's definitely Rollins Blake. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Let's see if there are any questions. I thought the questions and responses were pretty thorough. And let's see if there are any questions from commissioners.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have one.
Yes.
Mr. Commissioner Roby,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Batts, what is your opinion of Kalia?
I like CALEA. I think as I travel around and I talk to other organizations that have CALEA, they're very impressed with it. They say it's very intensive. I haven't been in an organization that I've brought CALEA in, but I'm very supportive of CALEA. I think it's a good thing. It sets a standard that you need to hold.
Yes, and those standards were not the standards that Baltimore City was holding in terms of their policies and procedures and rules and regulations. Is that correct?
Policies and procedures. There were some of those policies that were outdated. If I remember correctly, back to the 90s or 80s, the policies were very broken.
I served on the commission for 9 years, and I know during my tenure there, CALEA received several grants from the Department of Justice, and some of that money was to pay for the cost. And it's not cheap, but it's not overly expensive. But it would have paid for some of the costs associated with agencies that we read a lot about in the paper and thought that they needed CALEA's help. It was offered to Baltimore City, and it was rejected. And I was just wondering if that had been accepted long before Freddie Gray, long before a lot of these other incidents, all the policies and procedures that I'm familiar with in CALEA, and the fact that they're constantly being updated to keep pace with modern times would have been in place, and it would have solved a lot of the problems in terms of early warning systems, audits of different parts of the department. I think it's a shame that Baltimore City missed that part. It's a big shame. That's all.
I don't disagree, Commissioner Roby. What I found is the larger departments, I haven't found that many, and I could be wrong because I don't have the total knowledge of it, but I haven't found that many large departments go with CALEA. The smaller departments tend to go with CALEA, and mid-sized to smaller departments. Although I think they're doable, and I think everything they do, I'm a supporter of CALEA. I guess what I'm saying. What I started looking at when I came in is Lexipol. So Lexipol basically has the same framework that you're talking about with CALEA. It doesn't have all the standards, but it updates based on technology, updating all the policies and procedures. They also do advanced officer training every day based off those policies, procedures. They also give you updated case law, and they automatically update your policies and procedures. So we started down that track is where we started, and we ran into some roadblocks on that one.
Understand. I just, in response to the large departments, you're absolutely right. At one time, New Orleans was CALIA accredited, and they chose to drop out of that. I will say this, that in Maryland, the Maryland State Police, Baltimore County Police, Anne Arundel County Police, Montgomery County Police, Prince George's County Police, Howard County, all of us have been accredited for a number of years. And I think so many of the problems that Baltimore City has experienced, and I know it's a different environment, but I think so many of those problems that they experience are not experienced. We still have our problems, but not experienced to the extent that Baltimore City's gone through. Thank you very much.
I agree with your summation. And I think like what I started with is the systems and those policies, procedures, and everything you're talking about, all those systems in an organization.
Exactly.
And if those things are broken, everything around it is broken.
Exactly. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, if I may. Good morning, Commissioner. Nice to see you.
Sir.
Again.
Yes, sir.
I want to talk a little bit about your relationship. You touched on it a little bit regarding the federal partners.
Yes.
So, and I guess it was Deputy Commissioner Rodriguez was kind of your point person with them.
Yes and no. For clarification, he was the point person for the integrity part. He would work with the FBI. I was the point for meeting with them. I think it was either bi-weekly or once a month. I forgot. I met with them on a regular basis as a group.
Right. So we've had testimony before the commission. One commissioner said he had a great open relationship similar to what you're talking about. And Commissioner Davis in particular said he had basically no communication, is my recollection, with the federal partners regarding cases that might or might not be ongoing, involving integrity issues in the department, or those other cases that reached out. I want to know your kind of thoughts on that. And how were you satisfied with your relationship with the federal partners and working with them?
I can't speak for Kevin's relationship that was there, which I find that kind of strange because Kevin had been around Maryland for a long time. So Kevin knows everybody. So I find that kind of a little strange. My relationship was dynamite from day one. Fred Billfeld did a great job in kind of organizing this, where the guys met on a regular basis. Fred also had the area chiefs. Initially, when I was there, he had a regular meeting with them, and that continued, kind of fell off the end of my second year. And those were frameworks that Fred had built already. So I just kind of slid right in there with the bringing in the federal partners, U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein. I forget, he gets mad if you don't pronounce it the right way. But all of them came together, great relationship. I could pick up the phone. They would call me when different things and trends and patterns were popping up. I forget the FBI sec that I was there, but he was a dynamite guy, gave me information. And there again, if he had picked up on his radar screen those issues dealing with that gun trace task force, he would have called me immediately. We would have been on the phone immediately. My relationship was dynamite.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Parker.
Good morning,
Morning,
Commissioner.
ma'am.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
I'm really trying to wrap my mind around what to ask. My first instinct is to ask about what do you think, or what are your feelings about how the police department can change or shift in a way that the community can truly trust them?
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting because I think the title of your committee is Restoring Trust in Policing. And so when I read that, my question was, has the city of Baltimore ever had trust in policing? And from a bigger scope, I asked this question of people that I work with on a regular basis is there any time that and I'm getting philosophical here, so please bear with me for a second. I say, is there any time that we as minority communities have had trust in policing as a whole? And I started by asking friends of mine outside of Baltimore and other places in the West Coast, do you know any time that your parents, your grandparents have ever had trust in policing? And the answer is no. And African-American friends, Hispanic, and a little lesser degree of Asian communities. And so the question I didn't ask, well, why is that? Because we've gone from ages of where you have African-American chiefs of police, you have female chiefs of police, you have all these different things. We've had citizen oversight boards. LAPD had citizen oversight boards for years before they had Rodney King. New York has had citizen oversight boards for years before the issues that they've dealt with. So if you've had a changing of the guard, you've had different people, and for me, why I do what I do is because I came from those communities and I want to give back, and I understand and I want to change those things. And so I think you have to have respect for that position. That's chief of police or commissioner that's coming in. The person has to be apolitical, can't be connected to the politicians. They have to be there for a long period of time, and that the city and the community, and specifically the community, has to direct and say what they want from that police department. And that police chief has to be accountable to that community, reporting back on the achievements that they're taking place. And then the chief has to have the power to remove people who don't want to get on the bus or go the right direction. For me, what ran into a big problem for me changing that organization is the board that gives discipline, right? And so there's things that I saw that were clearly wrong, but I don't have the right to go down and talk to anybody on that board to tell them to hold these people accountable. Because if it is, it's not been a just system, but it should be theoretically. If I see something wrong, my command staff should see something wrong. But what ended up happening at the beginning was I put people there and they were letting people off. So there was things that were going on that were bad, but they were getting the officers that were coming before these boards were being let off the hook. So I would remove, and I don't want to cause problems because I'm not there, but I will remove that board and give that power to the commissioner or the chief of police to start changing culture and removing people and holding people accountable.
Do you know the formal name of that board?
I don't. As you, I think it's at this stage, all of them starting to run together. But it's a discipline board that sits over the IA process. So when to explain it to you, when internal affairs investigation goes through and they have a recommendation, the person is charged. They go before this board, and the board is usually made up of command staff members that sit on the board. They are brought together for that particular case. They make and they put it on like a jury trial. They put on a case, and based on that, the command staff has to make a ruling. And based on that ruling, the personnel are either held accountable or not held accountable. Whereas where I came from, I have no board. That information comes directly to me. And as I want to change and shift that culture, I change and shift that culture, and I hold people accountable based on that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Malone, is this what we refer to as the trial board?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Betts.
Thank you.
All right.
If I may, Chief,
Yes.
Sorry. Good morning, Commissioner.
Yes,
So as a couple of things kind of struck me in your testimony. During your tenure in the department, I know the previous commissioner, I don't believe, was doing them. The subsequent commissioner didn't do them. Did you do integrity tests of officers?
No, the only integrity test that I remember we were doing would have been out of that FBI task force.
Okay.
But internal, kind of like the ones that you're talking about that Frazier did in the mid 1990s, and that I think you guys just started recently. No, I didn't do those.
Okay. And you guys did not polygraph officers going into specialized units, correct?
To the best of my recollection, no. That would probably, if I had to guess, that would have to have been a negotiated item that came out of the police negotiations, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think you're wrong on that, but I guess. All right, but you, I mean, a lot of the gun trace task force activity took place during your tenure, and I guess what's I understand as a commissioner, you're coming in from the outside, you see what you believe is a broken police department, and there's a lot of things that you have to take a look at. So getting involved with the street level unit is pretty far down for you. I think one of the frustrating things in looking at this case is you hear that from everybody. What role did Dean Palmier play in your organization? He was
Dean at different times, if I remember correctly.
right.
I think he started off as he may have started off as a colonel and became a deputy commissioner, if I remember correctly.
I think that's right. and I believe the gun trace task fell under him as well. But to hear the command, I mean, from lieutenant up to two commissioners, everybody says didn't know, didn't realize. This frontline supervisor said they were going outside the chain of command. Were these a type of, did you, I mean, there are indicators I would think that you could have seen potentially in ComStat. Did you guys chart citizen complaints and map them and go over them in ComStat? Was that not a indicator you looked at?
ComStat had to be rebuilt the way that I wanted it to, so that took a while. Then we started rebuilding on budget, and then we started, I think towards the tail end, we may have. I don't want to say something I don't remember. I don't remember. I know we started doing, we had to restructure and doing budget. And let me kind of loop back, because you had a lot of questions in there, I think, in presentation. Ultimately, anything that goes on in an organization falls under my tenure, anything that goes on. But when you have an organization that's 3,400 people strong, that's a corporation, right? And my job and oversight is policy direction for that organization, vision, and those things that we put in place. And we got the results that we were looking for. Within 2 years, within 2.5 years, roughly, there's only so many things that you can do. The organization was broken dramatically. Let me give you a little insight. So I could put this in context for you, because you're kind of making it simplistic. Why didn't you see this, and why didn't people pop up with it? Because this is I think this is in my first year that I had to address things, right? So when I landed, I dealt with an in-custody death called a gentleman called Anthony Anderson. I was supposed to be worked about 2 weeks later, but I get off the boat, I'm dealing with Anthony Anderson. And I could see that we have some issues there. Next thing I have is a Super Bowl and Super Bowl parade, which went terribly wrong. The Super Bowl parade itself, what told me is that our incident command system, our NIM systems, our ability to stay on top of things was not there. Our mobile field force was not correct, and we didn't know how to do mobile field force. Right after that, 2 weeks later, I have an academy incident where one of my TAC officers shoots a recruit in the head on taking him off the grounds as a whole. After that, I had an officer shoot his girlfriend. Baltimore officers were there on scene, let the lady lay on the ground for about an hour before we were able to get her the safety. I had a gentleman cut the throat of a dog. It was a lost dog. He just got tired of dealing with dogs, so he cut the throat of a lost dog. Right after that, I had issues with looking at felony stops. Our guys were doing felony stops in unsafe ways. We weren't doing active shooters the way that we needed to be doing as a whole. We had a lack of follow through on most things. Our crime stats were taken or done by this thing called Lotus Notes, which was from the 1980s. There was a lack of accountability all the way through the organization. The budget was upside down because nobody even had seen a budget. They didn't know how to manage a budget. So I had to restructure the budget to bring in accountability. If you're not picking up from what I'm saying, is that there were so many significant things going on in that organization, so many significant things that were broken. That was just one of many. In a perfect world, absolutely, you're able to do integrity tests, but at some point in time, within 2 years or 2.5 years, you got to focus on certain things, and that's what we did.
But you know, you indicated, and I agreed with what you said, and you said it eloquently, that integrity is really the hallmark of policing. It's the benchmark of it. And coming as a new commissioner to an agency that was broken, and that, as you said, had a legacy of problems, wouldn't integrity been where you start? I mean, an integrity test isn't hard to institute. Polygraphs aren't hard to institute. Fully staffing internal affairs isn't hard to institute. Wouldn't have those been kind of first steps, or no?
Well, first steps for me was, are we making sure that we're not doing unlawful officer-involved shootings? The officer-involved shooting rate was through the roof from my standpoint, which is where I started focusing on. Where citizens were being treated out on the street is where I started focusing on. Trying to build policy and infrastructure was where I focused on. Every one of those things I'm talking about is extremely important. Another one that came up that I pushed to the back was mobile field force. Did that become an issue too at the same time? And so you can bring up one of many. This department was so broken. The question becomes, and I throw this out to when I'm teaching people about Baltimore, where do you start?
Commissioner
Are you asking
Malone?
me?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, you were hired to do that.
I was asking. That was a rhetorical question.
Okay. All right. That's it. in ComStat, the gun trace task force numbers were they were off the charts. I mean, they were very high. They were removing significant amounts of weapons from the street, well above any other unit. Are you aware that during your tenure at ComStat, the questions ever get asked about, wait a minute, this unit's so good, what are they doing? Is it a new tactic in policing or something awry?
Don't recall.
That's fine, thanks.
All right, Commissioner Inez Robb, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Commissioner Batts, good
Yes, ma'am.
seeing you again. Good seeing you again.
I can't see you on this side, but it's good hearing your voice.
Yeah, I for some reason my video is not coming up. But Commissioner Batts,
Yes, ma'am.
two things. The system's being broken. What would be the first three things that you would do that you think that would help with the systems? And secondly, you said policies, which I agree on both. The policies, what are the first three things you think that you would work on to try to build this trust with community and the police departments? Those two, the first three in both areas, and including the integrity piece. Would you share that with us?
I may have to have you ask you to go back over those, but I'll think about the last one first. And I think you were a part of that. And I think you have to open up an organization. There can't be anything that's hidden there. You got to share with the organization the flaws, the hiccups, the bad parts. When you're doing the integrity stings, the results of the integrity stings, one of the things different states are looking at is letting people see all parts of the organization, including discipline, what type of discipline, all those different things. So transparency for me becomes job number one. And some of those things you took a part in too, along those lines. So I think that has to be number one. We have to remember that police department works for that community. And so I think many times police departments kind of have a closed structure and they don't let people in. For whatever reason, we think we have to hide things. And I think that's just the opposite. The more that you open that organization up, the more trust that you have in the organization. And the fact that people know that you're holding bad players accountable for what they're doing as a whole. I think your first question is the first thing. I think for any organization, you have to have a vision of where you're going, what you're trying to accomplish. It's almost, for me, is going backwards, kind of like what type of police officer does this community, not me, what type of police officer does this community want out on its streets? And once you have that police officer, you have to build everything backwards to make that happen, which means if you want an officer that is community police friendly, if that officer is, you want them in your community, you want them to be able to deal with crisis situations, you have to then start providing training that gets them to that point. And you also have to build policies and procedures that hold them accountable for making those things happen. So my first thing would be ask the community, what do you want? And then kind of build it. And during the time that I was there, that's basically what we went and asked. If you look at a strategic plan, unfortunately, when we went and asked the community what they want, what you will look at, what you'll see is that the community had no trust and no faith in the police organization. If you go back and you look at, excuse me one quick second. If you look at pages 15 and page 16, specifically in that strategic plan, page 16, I call that a legitimacy chart. What that will show you is that the community didn't think the police department was fair or good at what it did. And if you look at page 15 of community importance, what the community was looking at, it would say the things that the community as a whole wanted the police department to do, the police department wasn't very good at doing based on the community standpoint. So my point is everything that the community wants, it's our job to build that officer or department in the likeness that the community says that it should. If that makes any sense. It's like starting at the end and then building backwards.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I did share with the other commissioners how you were instrumental in having the CRC presidents involved in the promotional process. And we thought that was just excellent.
Yes,
that was really good. And I share that with people all the time. Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Commissioner McKinney has another question. Yes.
Yeah, Commissioner, you talked about, I think what you termed interference or
You
contact.
broke, you broke, sir.
regarding-
You broke, Commissioner. You broke. I can hear you. I'm sorry, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. You talked earlier about interference or contact you had from elected officials.
Yes.
Involving activities in the police department. And you talked about specifically hiring and promotions. Did you ever have that subtle contact regarding any investigations, any IID matters, any misconduct issues
Just
regarding individuals?
just once. I had, when I first got there, there was 2 command officers who were accused of abusing overtime. And there was an IA case that came out upon that. And I had a elected official who was extremely overly interested in that case and would ask me questions about it and provide what they believed was the correct direction on that particular case. And I think that's the only time dealing with internal affairs things.
Anything else, Gary?
I'm just deciding how far to go with that one. But
Take your time.
Yeah, that's disturbing. And I know as a chief, those things occur. But this commission's needs to make some serious recommendations.
Well, I would, without getting myself sued from a hearsay standpoint, what I would say is I ran into some difficulty, actually pretty much pissed off some high profile people in that city because they were sticking their noses in places. And I had to tell them that if it's illegal, if it's unethical, and if it's not the right thing to do, I was going to do it, nor was I going to cower to them because they simply said to do it. And it came back to bite me later in my closing days. So,
is that something you experienced in other agencies you were with to this degree?
To a degree, different ways. You've been in that position, so we both know that there's times that people are going to ask you things, and I think my responsibility, like I said, I work for mayors, I work for city managers, city administrators, I work for the public trust. Bottom line. And if it costs me my job, it costs me my job. It just kind of comes along with the territory. But I think when politicians stick their fingers in police organizations, the workers there know that they don't have to listen to you because the politician is going to take care of them, or the politician is going to get them promoted, or the politician is going to get rid of the chief of police or commissioner if they don't do what they want them to do. And so you have to have someone who, I think when they go into that job, knows that it's a short-term job. They know that it may cost you a job. It just kind of comes along with the territory and the job, as you well know.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just have one quick.
Go ahead, Long.
So under the LEOBR, the commissioner has the right to raise the recommendation of punishment from a trial board. Did you do that during your tenure? I mean, How many times, if you remember?
I did do it, and I don't remember, no, but I think it starts to distort the system if you do it an awful lot. I think the correct issue is to train your command staff in what they should be looking for and your expectations of why. Let them question and push back. If they disagree, they get to disagree, but understand where we're trying to go and what we're trying to achieve.
Did you provide trial board training for your chairs? Okay.
Multiple times.
And in your previous assignment, I guess it was in Oakland, you were the final say. If they wanted to appeal your decision, they would go to civil service. Is that how it worked?
I'd say let's talk about Long Beach. I remember Long Beach better than I remember Oakland, but yes.
Okay. So in Long Beach, if an officer, did they get a full hearing before the Civil Service Commission?
If they wanted to appeal it, yes.
And if they were successful, then they were rehired with back pay?
Yes.
So the difference then being in Maryland, in the Baltimore Police Department, your command staff oversaw the trial board. They determined guilt or innocence, which you couldn't overturn, but you could raise punishment. And then you would have ultimately the final say with regard to punishment, and the case went to the courts, right? It was upfront. When in Long Beach, would the officer be removed from service without pay? Is that how it worked?
Depending on the egregiousness of the incident.
Okay. I mean, so ultimately the systems, you make an initial determination. If they don't like that termination, they get to go to a hearing board. And
Well-
in the bulk, right? I mean, if I'm just trying to
Right.
figure.
I'm sorry for interrupting because you had a lot in your last, a lot that you threw in there. I think what you're asking is, are the systems similar? Do they get to the same endpoint? Theoretically, yes, they could get to the same endpoint. The difference for me is when it came to me in Long Beach, I didn't have to convince my command staff for which way I was going. My discipline gave the direction to the organization, what I expected out of them, right? So it cut to the chase. Do they have the opportunity to appeal on both processes? Yes, and they should. They should have the ability to appeal to go above the person in the organization to ask for those things. So it could be it could be a preference, but what I would tell you from my preference being in both systems, I have more control when it comes to me.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Was there anything about the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights that handicapped you as a chief?
Judge, that got me in a lot of trouble. I would say this, it was different. And so in each state, you have a different law enforcement Bill of Rights. I come from a different state that has a different law enforcement Bill of Rights. What I saw is, I believe that at the time I was in Maryland, the law enforcement Bill of Rights in Maryland were stronger in some cases than what I was used to where I came from. So there was a difference that's there. So if you ask me if it was handicapped, it was just different. It wasn't done the way that I was used to doing it. I thought there should have been changes, but I wanted to stay out of that realm. I got pulled into that realm where I didn't want to be based on politics. But there again, that has to be a decision of the citizens of that state.
All right, and I guess the last question I have is your relationship with the prosecutor and the state's attorney. We heard testimony that there was a no testimony list for some prosecutors. And what's the importance of the relationship between the department and the state's attorney? I know you probably have some experience over the West Coast with the district attorneys, and I don't know, was Harris over there as a district attorney when you were in Oakland?
No,
Okay.
Miss Kamala Harris is a good friend, but when I was there, she was DA of San Francisco and ended up becoming state's attorney, U.S.
Okay.
The state's attorney. I think in Baltimore, Bernstein was there, and Bernstein and I dealt with each other fine. I think he was very used to doing it the way I probably caused him some irritations because he was used to dealing with Fred. He and Fred had a very close relationship. And Bernstein's wife, Goldstein, I believe it is, she had some type of interplay within the police department also. So I think they were used to doing that way. And I came in doing things differently. I wanted to change things up and do things my way and have the organization see it from a different standpoint. But we got along well. We'd have lunch at different times, have conversations straightforward. He could pick up the phone and call me and I could call him. And so in California, you have a bigger DA's office. It's huge, right? And I think the relationship was about the same there. Towards the end of my career, things were a little different than I wasn't used to. And I think that may have been for an array of different reasons, but I think the vast majority of my time in Baltimore and in Oakland and in Long Beach, you have an alignment between the prosecutor's office and the police department.
All right, commissioners, any other questions of Commissioner Batts?
Yeah.
All right, Commissioner, we certainly appreciate your cooperation here, your reflections. This is very helpful. I took good notes. I know our staff took good notes also. So I certainly appreciate your thoughts and time.
Judge, can I ask you one question, sir, if I may?
Certainly.
I thought there was a question that you guys wanted to ask about overtime.
Yes, you have comments on that?
No, I just thought you guys were going to ask. I think what I would say, because I think when I was talking prior, that there was a question on, was there an issue with the overtime? Because a lot of this stuff deals with overtime. What I would say is when I took over, when I was reading the memorandum of agreement or understanding between the union and the organization, it almost looked to me, my memory serves, is that it almost looked to me that the system was built that officers were getting overtime on a daily basis, right? It's like a certain amount of people had to be off, and if you had that certain amount of people off, you had to call people back, right? And I remember thinking, and don't quote me, this is just my mindset that I'm trying to remember, is that it was almost, what went through my mind was perhaps somebody it came to a point where officers were not getting pay raises when they should, because sometimes cities do this where they build in overtime that's there. And I remember thinking that was a little problematic. I wanted to go, the other thing that when I changed the system was officers, there was reports of officers being overworked, officers working a tremendous amount of overtime. There was a news report that came off catching police officers sleeping in cars. It was embarrassing. And when I talked to the officers, what they were saying is that the rotation system that they had was draining them in this very, very busy city. I wanted guys to start going to school, and I asked them, did they have the opportunity to go to school on the off time? And they said with the rotation program that they had, they could not. Single parents were a little problematic because the rotation system was so constant. So I wanted to go back to a system, number one, that I grew up with in the city of Long Beach, that it was there. It's been there probably at least for 40 years. And at some point in time, I was in control, or I was responsible for our deployment system. And with the deployment system I wanted to go to was based on workload and data. When I got there, I thought the system was just putting people where people thought they should go. But I wanted to put officers in places based on workload and systems. I called in a consultant who I knew of prior to take a look at workload. So we started seeing where workload needed to shift within the system based on demand. Also with the system, going to a 10-hour workday would have overlapped officers at the same time. So at your most busiest times, you would have overlapped officers at the same time. And you had your heaviest deployment. The other thing I wanted to do is shift people off of having so many weekends off. And it's not popular to police officers. Everybody wants the weekend off, but I wanted to we had our most problematic times were probably Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays, and sometimes Sundays. And so I wanted to put those officers on those heavy days, which also meant that less officers had time off on the weekends as a whole. And so when we instituted the 10-hour workday, 10-hour workday says that you have to have a specific number of people in that deployment system. Which I had to do is I had to draw down from detectives and other specialized units to make sure that we had that number to make that system work. If that system's dropped below that specific number, you can't do a 10-hour workday, right? And so if you got to a point where officers were leaving in droves to go to other police departments, if you got to the point where your IA cases were going up dramatically and officers were pulled out of the field, if you got to the case where officers were calling in sick a heavy amount of time or injured on duty, your numbers were going to drop down below and you couldn't do a 10-hour workday. And if you can't do a 10-hour workday, it'd be very easy to flip back to an 8-hour workday. It doesn't take a whole lot of sophistication to make that happen. When people ask me, did the 10-hour workday drive overtime? If it was driving overtime, it'd be very simple to click back to the system that you had before. It wasn't that big a deal. I was not into, and I think I've been accused of saying that there was going to be dramatic savings. I don't think I ever said there's going to be dramatic savings. If I do, I'll stand in correction of that. Usually in my mind, I would not say anytime that you will have dramatic overtime savings because you don't know that. Because there's critical things that come up during a year that may drive your overtime that you don't know. So for you to get out there and say we're going to have all these savings would be incorrect. And I hope I wasn't a person who said that. I was not a part of the negotiations with the overtime. I was left out of that. That was handled by City Hall. The metrics were set by City Hall. I do remember at some given point in time that my command staff, who was part of the City Hall's discussion, came to me and said they had issues with the 10-hour workday, the way that it was being implemented. I went to my bosses and had a conversation several times that said that there were some issues that I didn't like with the system. And I still worked for people. Decision was made and the system went forth. Like I said, I don't think I put any metrics on how much overtime you would save because that tends not to be me. I would not normally do something like that.
All right. Okay, thank you for your comments and remarks and your testimony. And
Yes, sir.
we'll go ahead and excuse you and feel free if you have any other thoughts to get in contact with us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
All right.
Commissioners. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Bye-bye. You're free to
God bless.
leave. All right. Now, commissioners, we are just about done for today. Let me say that we all are looking at outstanding recommendations that we have to work on. And I know that, who is this? Commissioner Rob is interested in community policing, and I believe the staff is getting with her to come up with a recommendation that's workable. So we'll be looking at that. Plain clothes units, again, Gary, I understand staff is looking at some language that will satisfy you at that point. So we'll talk about that on Friday. And then we also have the Maryland Public Information Act. And Sean, you'll go through that with us and any remaining recommendations that you need to bring back to us for final approval. I think Commissioner Parker, the misconduct and the tracking database has been dealt with, but if not, if you want to look at that again to get a read or approval, we certainly can do that, but I think we dealt with it last time. I'm not sure.
I'll reach out to the staff.
Okay, great. All right. But that's all I have for today. Are there any other items that we need to talk about beyond scheduling? We have a Friday schedule, which is set for, what time is it? 10 o'clock on Friday, October 16th. That's our next meeting. And then we also have a meeting for October the 19th at 1:30. So beyond that, we'll probably be wrapping up our report and be reflecting on our report that has to be submitted hopefully shortly after that. Okay, anything else? All right, if not, then we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, it's been seconded that we adjourn. Any opposition or problems? If not, we'll adjourn. And we'll see you all at 10 o'clock on Friday for our 9th virtual meeting. All right, thank you.